Good morning, Minnesota DFLers. We've made it to Friday, and welcome to the DFL Daily. Richard Carlbaum here, chair of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party. As we close out this week, there are so many ways that I'm looking forward to being plugged in this weekend, and I just want to mention a few of them today and this weekend that you all should be tracking as well. First off, later today, there's a coffee and conversation in Hibbing at 3:30. It's a chance to sit down with our CD8 organizer, Grace. She's fantastic to talk about what's next up there on the Iron Range. Tomorrow morning, neighbors are gathering across the metro and in greater Minnesota with coffee and conversations. Again, many with our local community organizers. Some will be happening in Andover, Sartell, Coon Rapids, Apple Valley. All simple, welcoming ways to check in, meet people, and keep those post-caucus connections going. Also, tomorrow morning, for local elected officials and legislators, we have our elected officials convocation. You can go to our DFL website and find information about that. If you know an elected official who identifies as a Democrat and wants to possibly get elected as a delegate to conventions, they can come to the convocation tomorrow. Each congressional district will elect 5 elected officials as delegates to local and state convention. So really important stuff. Tomorrow afternoon, there's also the weekly Emmer Do Better protest in Chaska and a DFL happy hour in Llano Lakes if you're looking to plug in socially. Looking ahead to the weekend and early next week, we've got a virtual Train the Trainer session for constitutional observers on Sunday, followed by local DFL meetings Monday in Redwood Falls. Also, there's DFL meetings in Inver Grove Heights and Waseca. Whether you've got 10 minutes for coffee or a couple hours to help organize, there's a place for you right now to plug in. You can find all the full details and RSVP to these at dfl.org/events. All right, let's get into it. Let's take a look at what we've seen the past few days for this week. This week, Minnesotans showed the country what Democratic strength looks like in practice, not as an idea and not as a talking point, but as something that people chose to do. Across the state, Minnesotans showed up after a long days at work with kids in tow, with questions, some nerves, and determination ultimately, and decided that participation still matters. At a moment when fear is being used as a political weapon, people chose community instead. They chose to take part, and that choice matters. There's also an incredibly clear contrast that we should name. While Donald Trump continues his retribution campaign against Minnesotans with irresponsible immigration enforcement and using ICE agents to intimidate our communities and our neighbors, Minnesota Republicans have offered nothing in response. Elected Republicans in Minnesota have offered no resistance, no accountability, just unending alignment with Trump's actions and their consequences. Indeed, Republican elected officials have given up their humanity for Donald Trump. And they've shown they could care less about the First, the Fourth, and the 10th Amendments to the Constitution. Minnesotans, we responded anyway. Even as ICE refused to stop their active aggression in our neighborhoods and around schools, more than 30,000 people showed up in person for caucuses across the state. Even as intimidation was meant to suppress participation, we saw lines of 100 people stretching out the doors around the state. We saw caucuses who planned on 40 attendees seeing 500 people show up. Some sites reported 75% of attendees being first-timers. And our early data, we're collecting data through Sunday, but our early data shows that right now we're tracking towards 2/3 of the people who attended caucuses on Tuesday were first-time caucus goers. That turnout was not accidental. It was a statement of rejection of fear-based politics and a clear verdict on what Minnesotans think of Trump's campaign against our state and Minnesota Republicans' complicity with that retribution campaign. But before I attribute too much of this to Trump, I want to explicitly say that caucus night was not just a response to his administration. It was built through weeks of proactive organizing, preparation, and care. People like you who helped us recruit and identify and train precinct caucus conveners. People like Sonia Johnson and our party affairs team, Gloria Aho, who did their best to make sure that people had the resources and materials. Like the dozens of lawyers who prepared on caucus night to take phone calls if something did go wrong. Not one phone call came in. And to the many staff at Plato who stayed late into the night to make sure that not only did everybody have all the questions they needed answered, that they could get the data start entering into the system, but they stayed late to collect those preference ballot results as well, working through the night with many of our local leaders to get that in. So I want to say a heartfelt thank you to everybody who made this happen. You know, all the people who helped organize and train volunteers, neighbors checked in on each other, invited one another, communities made plans to show up together. When the moment came, people filled classrooms and gymnasiums and borrowed chairs, sometimes from Republican caucuses next door, and stood in lines that stretched out the door. First-time caucus goers stood alongside longtime organizers, and people who felt a real fear still chose to participate. That work connects everything we saw this week: the protests, the mutual aid, the constitutional observers, and the quieter acts of care that made participation possible. This is what community power looks like when it's sustained, disciplined, and shared. And this moment matters because it's not the finish line. It's simply a checkpoint. Caucus night wasn't the start of our 2026 campaign. We started that a long time ago. But caucus night was an important checkpoint in that campaign to deliver the largest electoral defeat of a sitting president in the history of Minnesota midterms. And that's what we're going to do right here in Minnesota. Caucus night showed what's possible when people organize together, and it gives us a clear foundation to build towards November. The 30,000 people, 2/3 of which were first-time ever caucus goers, that's going to be the fuel that fires our engine all the way through November. Next week, we'll take stock of where the party stands right now. We'll talk about how Minnesotans are the hero in this moment. The entire country, indeed the entire world, is watching Minnesota stand up to this authoritarian president. And we are showing the way of how resistance, consistent resistance, can defeat and fracture his coalition. And that's very exciting. We're going to talk more about that next week, about how Minnesotans should be and can be celebrated as leaders in this effort, and how we're going to continue to demonstrate that leadership through 2026. Our call to action on this Friday is let's strengthen a connection with one another. So as we close out this week, here's what we're asking. Reach out to someone you organized with or caucused alongside. Thank the person who chaired your precinct. Text the friend who showed up with you. Check in on a neighbor who took a risk to be there. If you don't have a coffee and conversation, like I mentioned earlier, like in Sartell and over other places, if you don't have one of those coffee and conversations near you, organize one yourself by inviting 3 friends to your local coffee shop. It's really that simple. Gather, make a plan, and execute. These relationships are the infrastructure that carries movements forward. They're what sustain momentum throughout through uncertainty and backlash all the way to Election Day, November 3rd, 2026. Thank you for showing up this week. Minnesota is stronger because of it, and we're going to keep building it from here. All right, folks, 270 days. We are now 270 days from the November 3rd, 2026 election. We have a lot of work in front of us. I'm excited to do it alongside you. Let's go win this thing. We'll see you Monday.